Listeners, let's not waste any time. Let's just get right into it. Chad, tell us something about industrial real estate that might surprise us.
Well, considering I might be one of the world's biggest industrial real estate nerds, it might be surprising to hear that I think most real estate investors should stay away from investing in industrial real estate.
Okay, that's provocative. I can't leave it there, so tell us a little bit more about that. Why should we stay away from industrial real estate?
Well, maybe I'll back it up a little bit first because I've been in industrial real estate for almost 20 years now, and I got my start in residential real estate, and I was investing in residential real estate, and I didn't buy my first industrial property until 2014. So I was in the industry for a good 10 years before I bought an industrial property. And even having built a portfolio over the last 10 years, it's a very complicated and at times frustrating investment vehicle. And where the main reason I think most investors should stay away from it is that unlike any other asset class, it has a disproportionate amount of risk attached to it. There's great upside with it as well. And there's reasons why I'm so attracted to industrial real estate and why I have my entire portfolio consisting of industrial. But it was a very, very steep learning curve to get a level of comfort where I could mitigate my downside risk. And what I've found with most investors, and it can be somebody that has a number of houses, or perhaps had some multifamily buildings, or perhaps a little strip center, and they get attracted to industrial real estate because it's now popular in the news, which 20 years ago it wasn't at all. Like it was an afterthought. So I have conversations with people regularly now who are like, okay, well, I've got some money, industrial sounds appealing, I want to buy an investment. I think that investor would be better suited not getting into industrial, because the learning curve of getting into industrial is so steep that it's going to take time and opportunity cost away from them pursuing something that they might already know well, whether that's making more single family investments or adding another multifamily. If someone really wanted to get into industrial and it was more than just buying a one-off asset, I think you need to be prepared to spend a good year really understanding what industrial real estate is, understanding the market intimately. And there's not a central database where you can just go and get all the information easily. So it takes a lot of turning over rocks and talking to people, and then really understand exactly what you're getting. And even then, I would say that you're best to partner with someone in your local market who's already done it. And failing that, if someone just really wanted to get into it, then there's other vehicles. Like you could be a limited partner in a GPLP model. You can buy real estate investment trusts. You can do a joint venture with somebody. But I would steer most people away from investing in industrial simply because the downside risk is so high that if you buy the wrong building, and it could just be a rookie mistake that you thought everything checked out, but if you buy that wrong building, it can erode so much wealth. So that's why I think the average investor should actually steer away from industrial.
Incredible value that you are bringing to us straight out of the gate. We haven't even done intros yet, and Chad, you are bringing it. So let's do intros. Listeners, you are listening to The Source of Commercial Real Estate, where we talk to the experts in non-residential commercial real estate so you can grow your business, find a competitive advantage, and use real estate to live the life that you want. I am your host, Jonathan Hayek. I'm a former public school teacher who found financial freedom through real estate investing, mostly in residential, and now I invest in commercial properties, particularly small industrial. And today, you know the voice. You recognize his voice. I'm talking with Chad Griffiths of NIA Commercial and YouTube and Twitter and LinkedIn and his podcast. He's everywhere. You know him. Chad entered the commercial real estate industry in 2004 and has completed over 500 transactions with clients. Ranging from local companies to large institutional owners, Chad has been a top 15 producer with NAI Canada with NAI Canada-wide since 2013 and became a partner in the Edmonton office in 2015. An active volunteer in the real estate and business community, Chad has previously served as chair and board member of the Real Estate Council of Alberta, board member of NAIOP Edmonton, president of the South Edmonton Business Association, and a member of the City of Edmonton. I can't say that word, I'm sorry. Junction Advisory Committee. Chad currently sits on the University of Alberta's Practice of Commercial Real Estate Course Advisory Committee. He is a busy guy. I am grateful that he's here with us. I love the industrial asset class, and we are about to get a masterclass in industrial real estate. So, Chad, say hello to everyone. And we already got into some value, but let's back up. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background and what your work looks like today?
Yeah, and thanks again so much for having me on the show. I just love talking about industrial real estate. So anytime I get an opportunity to do so, I welcome it with open arms. So I originally got into the industry. I mentioned I had bought and sold a few houses when I was younger. I had a few partners, and we bought and sold houses. We were trying to flip them, so we didn't really have a long-term strategy. We didn't really make a whole lot of money, but I had the itch to do real estate full time. So I became a real estate agent in 2004, focused on residential. I just did residential for the first year, and I didn't see a long-term plan or horizon for that for various reasons. So I got into commercial real estate that fall. So I think that was late 2004, joined a brokerage. I didn't even know what industrial real estate was. I thought office towers, retail shopping centers, like that glamorous aspect of commercial real estate. And it just so happened that the office that I joined had a heavy focus on industrial. So just by pure luck, that's what I ended up doing. And it was the best luck I possibly could have had, because I went from knowing nothing about it to becoming immersed in it and wanting to learn and study everything that I can about it. And fast forward 20 years now, I learn and study industrial real estate more today than I did when I actually first started. I am constantly reading history, actually. Last night, this will just explain how big of a real estate nerd I am. Last night, while my wife was watching a TV show and her kids were in bed, I was reading up on the history of the warehouse, on how far it actually goes back, like all the way back to Mesopotamia days, and then how Rome had warehouses and the Latin names that they were called. Like that's what I was geeking out on last night. So I love industrial real estate. It was very lucky to get into it 20 years ago. I've built my career around it. I'm invested solely in it as an asset class, and it's just something that I'm very passionate about.
And for listeners, I think it would be helpful if we clarify what we're talking about with industrial real estate. It's an umbrella term, and there is such a it's a continuum. We can be talking about stuff that's 100,000 to 200,000 square feet, Amazon warehouse kind of stuff. But then we're also talking about smaller stuff, the stuff that I personally invest in, stuff that's 7, 10,000, 15,000 square feet, where it's maybe a local or a regional operator, single tenant. But then there's also multi-tenant, sometimes called Class B, where it's lots of tenants in one building, and everyone has 2,500 square feet. And so there's a really wide variety of industrial real estate, which is part of the reason that I really like it. And Chad, you are so connected in the real estate world and the industrial real estate world, with all the things that you have going on. I want to ask you a really broad and open-ended question. Can you give us kind of a 30,000 foot view, with all the people that you talk to and all the research that you do? Where are we currently? We're in the first quarter, towards the end of the first quarter, 2024. Where are we in the industrial market cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to your point about it being such a broad term, at some point we might need to delineate industrial real estate into subcategories, because as I see it right now, certain subcategories are actually going in slightly different directions. And
Hmm.
much like yourself, I'm more in that small bay industrial. I don't own any large warehouse or distribution space. So I like that small to medium bay. My average tenant size is probably in that 5 to 10,000 square foot range as well. So I think if we were to break industrial into three categories, which is what I usually like to do, but I'm going to start adding a fourth now as well, because there's one that's gained a lot more prominence. Warehousing, anything where buildings are stored. Could be an Amazon distribution center, it can be a small bay warehouse, 3,000 square feet where people are just stocking online or board games. It could just be board games that are stocked in there that get sent out to the region. So it can be any type of building from 2,000 square feet to 10 million square feet. Buildings where things are stored. Then the manufacturing side are buildings where things are made. And the one that I always point to, I've seen it in person, it's incredible, is the Boeing factory just outside of Everett, or in Everett, just outside of Seattle. 4 million square foot building, all the raw materials go in. They used to be assembled correctly and went out the other way as an airplane. But I think that there's a few screws that haven't been turned quite enough lately. That those airplanes are having a little bit of trouble. But that's a massive 4 million square foot factory where it's made from scratch. All the raw inputs get assembled, produced, create an airplane, and goes out. But manufacturing can also be a small machine shop. It can be a 2,000 square foot machine shop where a guy has a simple CNC machine where he's fabricating metal out of it. So manufacturing is a very interesting one right now, and I think we could explore this one in quite a bit of detail. Third one that I always say is flex. This is probably my personal favorite. I describe it as any building, any industrial building in an industrial area that's zoned industrial that's used for purposes other than manufacturing and warehousing. So one building that I own, we've got a straight office tenant in it. So it's an industrial building. The one tenant is just office. We have a furniture store. We have a flower shop. We have a hot tub showroom and small warehouse area. We have an equestrian store of people selling just horse related equipment. And then we also have a cabinet showroom. So none of those are industrial uses, but that's a flex building, and there's tons of them. Like that's an area where I'm really intrigued with. That particular building is my favorite building in the portfolio. But there's so many different types of flex buildings. And then the other one that I'm going to start adding on is IOS, industrial outdoor storage. And this is an interesting one. It really just came on the radar within the last few years at that term, industrial outdoor storage, where really it's just industrial yard. I don't know who came up with the idea to coin it as this IOS, maybe to attract institutional money if they came up with this catchy name. But it's basically just industrial yard. But there's a ton of companies that use this type of yard space, from trucking companies that just need storage, companies that have lay down storage, if it's pipe or equipment or whatever it is. There's a lot of companies that are using iOS. So that's probably a fourth one that I'm going to include going forward. But the three biggest ones by far, two biggest ones are manufacturing, warehousing, and then flex. So putting that all into context, and sorry if I'm going on a little bit too much here, stop me at any point. I think warehousing warehousing has slowed down, and there's a few factors at play there. It went so fast over the last 3 years, 2020 to 2023. There was so much inventory added to the market, and developers were anticipating that growth would just continue on that upward trajectory forever. And we all know it's a cycle, things ebb and flow, and we've hit that part now where people are going to the retail stores a little bit more. They're not shopping online as much, as we might have some downward pressure on the economy. So that has slowed down, and there's some markets right now that have been overbuilt, and there's a lot of supply that has to be worked through to bring that vacancy number down. So we will see a slowdown on that warehousing side. It's inevitable in my mind. At some point that could come back. There's all sorts of factors at play. Are interest rates causing developers to pull the brakes on future developments? Will that lead to an inventory shortage somewhere down the road? Perhaps. My crystal ball can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow, so I can't predict what's going to happen 2 years from now. But we are already seeing a slowdown in warehousing. The manufacturing side, on the other hand, is seeing an explosion, and that's driven by various tax incentives, bills in the U.S. The CHIPS Act is a huge one, or Inflation Reduction Act's another one. These are all flooding the market with money to encourage and incentivize developers and companies to onshore, reshore, bring more manufacturing back to North America. And it's working in spades. There's so many multi-billion dollar manufacturing projects underway right now, from semiconductors to EVs to batteries to just general manufacturing in general, that there's so much going on, and that will all flow down to other industries as well. So that the manufacturing side, that was a very long answer to say that manufacturing, I think, is going to do very well in the foreseeable future. I think warehouse is going to be flat and perhaps have some pressure on it, and it all hinges on a number of factors. Interest rates is going to be a big one. Immigration is going to be another big one. Consumer sentiment is going to be another big one. The election is going to be another big one. Like, there's so many forces coming at us this year that it's I like, whatever we talk about on this show might look completely different 6 months from now, just because of all these crazy things underway. But yeah, that's how I would summarize it, without rambling on too much longer.
Yeah, excellent summary. And what I really appreciate about how you approach real estate is you really seem to embrace nuance. The majority of people in the world, but in real estate in particular, say retail is this, office is that, industrial is like this. And the truth is that most things are gray. And so you did a great job of outlining, the four different parts of industrial real estate as you see it. And things are different in different asset classes, whether it's manufacturing versus flex versus just warehousing. Different markets are going to be different. And so I just really appreciate you kind of splicing things and breaking that down for us. When you talk to tenants as you're trying to lease properties, either for yourself or for other people, when you're talking to other landlords, what sorts of attributes in a property seem to be the most important for tenants in 2024?
Great question. And again, that's why I think it's so crucial to separate industrial into those subcategories. On the warehousing side, it's pretty straightforward on what a tenant's going to want. They want to be in close proximity to major thoroughfares. They probably want to be in close proximity to not just highways, but probably close to the airport, probably close to a rail line, close to suppliers, close to customers is always a benefit. But the location is a big factor when where they want to be. They're probably going to want to have high ceiling heights. For, again, on just the warehousing side, they're going to want to have a certain amount of dock doors. They're going to want to have a certain column spacing, basically just the column grid, or the columns that hold the foundation and the structure up. So all these get tied into the fact that what they're doing in that space is they're bringing stuff in. The stuff gets stored for, could be 15 minutes. It could be stored for a year. They need to be able to prioritize where that goes depending on how long it's going to stay in the warehouse for. And it'll probably go on to racking. So they need to have high enough ceiling height that they can get the racking height that they want. They might want to have 3, they might have 4 rows of racking. And then also the column grid is going to dictate how many racks they can put in there as well. And then the forklift access and everything that they have in there. They're probably going to want to have sprinklers. That's going to be, for anything modern building, it's going to have sprinklers. They might need to have an air makeup system. That's consistent anywhere in the world. You could have a distribution center in Calcutta, India. You could have a distribution center in Vancouver, Canada. You can have a distribution center in Mexico. They're all going to have very similar requirements to that. What I see happening, which this has a chance to throw a monkey wrench into the whole warehouse industry, is that system has been very standard. The technology inside and the building materials, that's all evolved, but it's still relatively the same process. What I see changing, and this could have a fundamental change on the warehousing industry, is that robotics and automation and racking systems is accelerating at such a quick pace. And the leading companies, Amazon, the large 3PLs, they're already starting to incorporate this, is that they're bringing in automation and racking systems that essentially removes the human worker, removes the forklift. It's machineries that go and pick the items, scan it, pick the right item. I think that's coming eventually in a more broad sense and to more companies. But with the implication that has, that's going to require a lot more power. And I don't think the vast majority of buildings built 10 years ago or longer, even some that are built right now, don't have the power requirements to accommodate the draw that will come from all this equipment. All this needs power, so they're going to have a considerable increase in power requirements. So that's a little bit of a side thought on warehousing, but that's one that I'm really following, because I think that there's going to be some big problems that creep into that space, and they'll just add another area of functional obsolescence, where just like a warehouse with low ceiling heights isn't as appealing as one with high ceiling heights. I think a building with low power will look less appealing to a modern building that has adequate power. So that's an interesting one on warehousing. Manufacturing can be completely different, because it all depends on what any individual company is doing. It can be a pipe fabrication facility. That one's top of mind right now, because I'm working with one in that area. There's different processes even within that pipe fabrication system. One might just actually hold the pipe, so they might just need a whole bunch of yard space to hold the pipe. They might do the fabrication on site. They might ship it out to another fabrication that just deals with the pipe fabrication. So and this gets to the root of my opening statement on why people shouldn't invest in industrial unless they're prepared to really understand it, is that every manufacturing property is different. It's very unlikely you're going to see two manufacturing properties that are similar, whereas warehousing, they are cookie cutter. A warehouse is a warehouse, provided you could get through those basic elements and identify those. There's not a whole lot that you need to be surprised with. With a manufacturing property, these are often made tailored to what the business that's using it for their operations. And if it was set up specifically for that one business, that likely means that the next business that goes in there is not going to have the same use for all of that investment that went into that building. And they might need a different set of investment to retrofit it for their needs. And that's when you might run into a building that sits vacant for an extended period of time. That might mean you have to have a huge capital cost investment to retrofit it for the next tenant. That's where the risk comes, because the manufacturing is just so much different. But if I could generalize, I would say that on the manufacturing side, most of them want to have some yard space. So the site coverage ratio is typically going to be lower. So if you have a 20,000 square foot building, they might want to have an acre or two or even more of yard space. They'll almost always need higher power, because they have machinery and equipment that all requires that. And then everything else after that is pretty much what they need a la carte. So there could be other things. They might need 40-foot ceilings. They might need 20-foot ceilings. They might need a whole bunch of office space. They might need no office space. A lot of the things after that can be customized, and often are customized. So that manufacturing can be very exciting. It's one that I really like myself, but that is a one that can come with a tremendous amount of risk.
Let's talk about maybe some smaller properties that you and I invest in, and maybe a lot of our listeners might be interested in. It's some of that big Class A 100,000 square foot stuff is just out of reach for the average investor. That's more institutional stuff.
Mhm.
So let's talk about maybe a 10,000 square foot single tenant flex property, or a 5 unit flex property where there's small office, bathroom, warehouse space, grade level door, something like that. Those are the types of properties that get smaller investors like me excited. So when we're looking at properties, smaller flex properties like that, what sorts of things should we be thinking about to make sure that it's attractive to the widest range of potential tenants?
Yeah, great question. And you're right. I love these myself as well. The inventory has been relatively fixed over the last 30, 40 years. It's really expensive to build them new. So if you can get a good deal on an existing one, the vacancy rate on these in a lot of markets is very low. And it's if you have a 5 unit building, you've got some diversity in there from leases expiring and overlapping. So I'm with you. I really like these ones as well. Typically what we'll see on these ones, and again, this is a very standard across markets all over, is call it a 2 to 3,000 square foot bay. So they might not have a separating wall in between. So it might be a 6,000 square foot unit next to a 4,000 square foot unit. But usually the columns are spaced such that if you did put up a demising wall, you could separate them down to 2 to 3,000 square feet. That's pretty common for those small bay industrial. And you're right. You're typically going to see 10 to 30% of office build out in the front. Depending on who was in there, you might see a small mezzanine space above the office, with just second floor storage. Sometimes those can be built out. Sometimes they're just left as open storage. And then quite often 18 to 24 foot ceilings. You'll have a unit heater in the warehouse, grade level overhead door. You might have a drain in the warehouse. You might not. And it's usually maximizing the amount of land that's there as well. So the one thing that I've one property that I bought had this deficiency, was it had a very small truck court or marshalling area. It's called loading area. It's called all different types of things, but essentially the amount of yard space that a vehicle had the ability to turn into and drive into the bay. If someone's bringing in a semi truck, there's actually a statistical number that's been shown as to be the optimal amount: 131 feet. An architect ran a bunch of software, said if under the worst case scenario, if you got a truck on one side and a truck on another and someone's trying to back in between it, the optimal depth for that truck court is 131 feet. Most of the time it's 130 or 135 in practice, but you can still get into a building if it's less. I've heard people say that they could back in, as long as there's no impediments, they can back in 100 feet. They can get a semi truck, a traditional 53 footer. The smaller you go, though, you start to eliminate those vehicles even being able to get to the property. Then you might have to look at just a cube van or a small commercial vehicle, but that's a big deal for tenants that want to be bringing in semi trucks to it. So that's the one thing that I'd really look at, is understand what the truck depth is and what vehicles can be in there. It's not necessarily a bad thing. There's plenty of tenants out there that don't need semi truck access, but you might restrict the amount of tenants, that prospective tenants that are out there, just because of that. But yeah, that's the thing, is I'd steer away from low ceiling heights. Probably the lowest I'd personally want to go is 18. um unless there's other reasons, like the one building I mentioned earlier. I believe we actually only have 12-foot overhead doors in that, but we don't have a single industrial tenant in there, so that one's fine in that case. But for a pure small bay industrial building where it's not that flex like we have, then yeah, you want to have, I would say 18 would be on the low side. Ideally, you've got minimum 14-foot high grade doors. If you go below 14, there's some vehicles that just can't get into the building at that point. So you start running into some issues there. Again, that's not to say that something with a 12-foot door is a showstopper, but from an optimal size, 14-foot door, 18-foot ceilings, small amount of office build out, and enough area for vehicles to get in, or what you'd expect vehicles to get in. That type of building is going to be in demand for forever. I don't see those buildings not being in demand anytime soon.
I want to ask you a question to see if you have any suggestions on estimating clear height. So when I'm touring a building, I always wonder, okay, how big is this door and what's the clear height? And with a bay door, I can count the panels on the
Mm-hmm.
bay door, and they're because the panels are 2 feet wide, and so I know how big the door is. But with clear height, I always forget my tape measure, and I'm like, man, how high is the ceiling? And then, I start like counting bricks and things like that. Do you have a quick and easy way to estimate or measure clear height?
Yeah, what I usually do, and I'm the same way. I have a laser measure, but all too often I forget it somewhere. What I do is, so the clear height, usually just the underside of the truss or the beam. The amount it's not to the deck of the roof. It's usually to the underside of the support system. Usually what I'll do is I'll look at the overhead door, and if it's 16 feet, I'll just try to ballpark what the difference is between the top of that overhead door and that lower part of the truss. And I mean, you could ballpark it within a foot or two pretty easily, because if you see a gap that's looks like it's 6 feet and you've got a 16-foot door, well, you're roughly 22 feet. And it's not going to be precise, but I've found that for like a quick and dirty number, that's as quick as I can do it. And then optimally, you want to put a tape measure or laser on it eventually too.
Chad, you recently had this interesting post on Twitter. I think it was your own property that you were posting pictures of. And it was this build out that you recently did for a tenant. And it doesn't look like an industrial property. I think it's probably a unit in a flex property. And it's this like incredibly well designed, very attractive build out with lots of glass and concrete and stainless steel. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Can you? So my question, I was shocked when I saw this. I'm like, wow, that is a gorgeous build out of this flex space. I would love to work there. Can you tell me a little bit about the story behind that particular unit, and if you believe there is room in the flex industrial space for some interesting designs like that?
Yeah, so that's the building that I was mentioning, the flex one that we have. So I own that building with three partners, and the partners in that building are also partners in my real estate brokerage, and that's our real estate brokerage's office. So it's a separate company. We have a holding company for that, and then we have our brokerage that's the tenant in there. When we bought that building, our intent was to demolish our office and build out a beautiful space. And we did. We had to move one of the tenants to another side of the building. We ended up taking about 7,000 square feet of it, took it all the way down to the concrete, and hired an interior designer, brought in a contractor that has done a lot of this stuff. And we spent a considerable amount of money building that out. Like it is class A office space, and we get a ton of compliments on it, but we're not the only ones by far that are doing things like that. In fact, I think on the office side, I'm not an office expert. I don't follow it enough to know it well, other than there's some pressure on the downtown markets all over the place. I think that's most people would agree on that, even if we're laymen on it. But where I'm still seeing a lot of appetite for office spaces in the suburbs, and that's where these industrial properties are. This one in particular, we're on a main road, so it's got some retail exposure to it. It's not tucked away deep in an industrial park. So we did a full exterior renovation on it as well. I might actually post that one on Twitter. Again, I posted it probably a year ago, the before and after, and it is so stark. It's amazing how different it is. But we're not the only ones. Like across the street from us is another flex building where they've got some industrial, but they've also got some office. There's an accountant that built out an awesome space for himself. So I think what a lot of companies, and ourselves included, is that you still want to have an office space. We don't want everybody just working from home forever. And some people just really want to be in the office. So if you provide them something where they can pull up to the building, they don't have to fight rush hour traffic, they don't have to park in a parkade and go through elevators just to get to their office and then do it all in reverse. I still see a pretty healthy appetite for demand for office space in the suburbs, and a flex building is a perfect way of doing it, especially if you have a building that has a lot of natural light, which this one does. That's another reason I get so excited about industrial, is that it can accommodate not just the traditional industrial users, but it can work for office, it can work for retail. It is so broad at the amount of uses that are out there for someone that's willing to be creative.
Yeah, I love it. And it sounds like one of the things that has made that property work for that use is the location. And that is from what I talk from the people I talk to in office, that is the saving grace for the properties that are doing well. It's location. And so if you've got a well located suburban flex property, the uses are virtually unlimited, and you may only be limited by the zoning requirements of that jurisdiction about what they'll allow in that property. Chad, you earlier had talked about you added a fourth sort of sub asset class to industrial real estate, and that's IOS, industrial outdoor storage. So I would love to kind of get your first define iOS and what the different uses are for iOS, and sort of what you see people using it for, and if you think it's a viable strategy for people.
Yeah, to start with the last question first, I do think it's a viable investment. It's something that I actively look for myself right now, uh, for a lot of reasons. One, there's not a whole lot of inventory available, so if you can find something, you'll probably be able to rent it out, and it's almost a covered land play where if you can earn income for some period of time, and as industrial development continues growing into that area, you might have an exit strategy of selling that to a developer down the road, or perhaps building on it yourself, or just even keeping it as it is and letting the land value increase. So I do like that strategy. So someone said the other day, I saw this on Twitter, someone was talking about iOS, and someone said, "Psst, it's just a parking lot." And there's some truth to that, because that's what a lot of people are using iOS for, is just semi-truck storage or vehicle storage or equipment storage. So I don't necessarily disagree with that flippant comment about it being just a parking lot, because there is some truth to that. But to describe what it is, it has to be industrial zoned property. You could perhaps do it on other property if it was agricultural, maybe. If it was commercial, maybe. It's every city's going to have different ordinances and regulations on how they govern it and what they allow on there, so maybe. But I would say iOS, industrial outdoor storage, it's industrial zone land. It's going to have some improvements on there. It's not just going to be a field. It's going to actually have either pavement or asphalt or concrete on there, so that vehicles can park without having to sink into the mud or get stuck in something. So it is going to be improved on the site. It might be fenced, it might be lit, there might be utilities to the site, so that there could be energized stalls or just power in general if someone has a small office pod or something they want to put on there. But all of that is going to vary. Like, it could just be a site that has gravel on it and is not fenced, and people can go and park their semi trucks on there. It could be as simple as that. But then it could also be as elaborate as being a fully fenced site and fully secured, and there might be a small spot on there where there's a small office pod. It could be fully serviced with utilities. The lighting system in there can be very elaborate. It could be asphalt, the whole thing. So there's a pretty big scale on it. And also, you mentioned this earlier, the size of it can be pretty different. It can be a 1 acre site to a 50-acre site. So it's a very broad category, and I still like that comment about it being just a parking lot, though, because that does sum it up pretty neatly.
Yeah, and from your experience, I think I guess that parking lot comment makes me think that there's an incredibly low barrier to entry, and all you have to do is just go buy some vacant land out in the sticks, and then you can start advertising to truck drivers to park their trucks there. But I've heard of people adding things like you talked about lighting. But if you've got a couple acres and you want to pour some concrete or some asphalt, that is a good chunk of money that it's going to
Mm-hmm.
take. If you want to add lighting, if there's no power to the site currently, or maybe it just goes to the lot line, that's a good chunk of money to bring lighting throughout the site. I've heard of some people providing Wi-Fi, like he was primarily leasing to truck drivers, and they were asking for internet, and so then he was bringing in Wi-Fi. And then you can think about security cameras and security gates and all those sorts of things. And so I think I would maybe, I've never done it myself, but I would maybe caution people against just thinking that they're simply going to buy a big open lot and make tons of money. That, I would imagine that the higher the rents that you want to command, the more of those other types of things that tenants, even truck drivers, are going to be asking for. Like, truck driver isn't going to want to pull in to your storage lot if they're going to get stuck in the mud, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's a serious issue that you're going to have to work out. And you might be able to figure it out with gravel, but even in a big storm, even that could pose a problem. And so yeah, do you agree with that? Do you think there might be a little more to it than just buying an empty lot and hoping for the best?
Couldn't agree more. And I'd add on to that as well, is that one of the things that I really like about industrial is that you can have longer term leases, and they don't all need to be long term, but we have 5-year tenants, we have 10-year tenants, we also have some 2-3 year tenants in there as well. On the If you're just leasing out to truck parking, they're transient tenants, and I don't say that in a derogatory term, but they can literally drive away. They don't have any infrastructure in the place. They're not tied to that spot other than they're paying you some amount of money to park there. And if they decide that if there's something cheaper down the road, they're just going to give you notice and they're going to be out. So you might have a tenant in there for a month. And I think on the spectrum of real estate, with a long tenure tenant being on one end and something like a hotel on the other end where you're renting it out nightly, that truck parking becomes very close to that hotel end pretty quickly, and now you're running a business. It's not even a real estate play as much as it's a business play where you just happen to own the real estate, and that takes a lot of management. You're dealing with issues that you're gonna have, always having constant turnover. You're always trying to find that next truck driver. To me, that's just not a very efficient use of time. So for that reason, as Kevin O'Leary would say, I'd be out. But I still like I still like iOS from the standpoint that there are tenants out there that you could get a single tenant that just needs yard storage, and they would be willing to sign a longer term lease. That's the appeal to me. I don't have interest in owning iOS and leasing it out to truck drivers on a month to month basis. That is very, very low on my list of things that I want to do.
I Yeah, I hear you, and I think I'm right there with you. I hear about people doing this, and I think it may leasing up a giant lot to truckers. Nothing against truckers, but I think would be even lower on my list than having like a nightly Airbnb. It
Mm-hmm.
just sounds like a massive headache to me. But to each their own. And I know there's in some markets, and especially if you can have a great location with great access for trucks, there could be a huge opportunity for that. Um, Chad, I want to ask you about your online strategy. You have fully embraced social media and technology. You have a ton of really great, valuable content on YouTube. For anyone that has any interest in industrial real estate and you have any question, it is likely that Chad has a video addressing that question about industrial real estate. You fully embraced Twitter and LinkedIn. You've got your podcast. You have a sub community through your podcast. I know every few weeks you appear with Tyler Cobble on an investors roundtable. And so you've really embraced this idea of just being everywhere. So, can you talk a little bit about what is your online strategy and how are you going about executing it?
Yeah, thanks for those kind words as well. I've been on social media actually for a long time. I've been on Twitter for 15 years. I've been on LinkedIn for 15 years, YouTube for 4 years or so, and I've had podcasts for the same time. I didn't start really getting traction until about 2, 3 years ago. And it was a conscious decision to change from trying to I was never one that was just big on self promotion, but what a lot of people do is they'll say, "Here's a deal that I'm just working on," or "Here's something interesting that's happening to me." And I shifted away from it being me focused to just being focused on whoever was listening or reading or tuned into that. So to the point where every piece of content that I put out, I want it to be value add for somebody that listens to the podcast or watches the video, that they'll walk away with something being like, "Oh, okay, I didn't know that before," or that's helpful, or that's something I can incorporate into my business, or that's an investment idea. So I really shifted it to just be for whoever's listening. And so much to the point that I don't talk about what company I work for. I don't even mention what city I live in. I've done 400 videos on my YouTube channel. I've done hundreds of podcasts. You'd be hard pressed to find me talk about either one of those unless it's brought up. And then I'm not, even then, I might even try to bat it away just because I want the focus to be on adding value. And to me, I for one part, I wish that that was available when I started. There's still not a ton available. I mean, you're in the small base space. It's as well as I do. It's still difficult finding good quality content out there. So I wish that that was out there. And I mean, it's probably pretty clear how much of an industrial real estate nerd I am and how passionate about this I am. I would still create this content even if nobody listened, just because I genuinely love learning something new and throwing it out there, and it's resonating with people. And I hear regularly that someone's like, "Oh, that I started doing that thing that you mentioned," or "I took that piece of information and I found an investment off of it." Like that to me is pretty exciting. So I never set this up as to be a business generator, because I don't even mention what city I live in. It'd be hard for someone to do business with me when they don't even know what city I'm in or what company I work for. But it's been something where I've made so many great connections now. I've made connections with people all over North America and some even in other parts of the world. If Shanghai, I've got a friend there now. I've got a friend in London now, from doing this. So I've taken the approach that if I take 10, 15, 20 years now, just trying to build a community and get to know people organically instead of trying to force it, instead of trying to DM someone and say, "Hey, would you be interested in doing business with me?" If it's more of just an organic reach where if I'm providing value and someone gets something from it and they reach out to me, great. If I make friends on this, great. If I got invited to go to Atlanta a couple of weeks ago to go quail hunting there, all because of social media. So the experiences that I've had and I've been asked to speak at, I've spoken at a number of universities, national conferences, I've spoken to companies. That's just really cool. And I wouldn't have got to do any of that without social media. So it's, I just, first of all, it's built entirely on passion. I just legitimately love talking about it. It doesn't feel like work. It's something that it's a hobby and a passion as much as it is business development, more so. And to be able to connect, even just be able to connect with you on this, it all happened just because of putting direct attention and passion into a project like this. So that's in a nutshell how I set it up, how I changed over the last couple of years, and what the game plan is going forward.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, I've similarly had just really interesting and memorable experiences because of real estate, and it's just an amazing thing to be a part of. And your passion for industrial real estate is admirable and contagious, and it's attractive. I mean, it attracts people to you. The fact that you are so passionate about your niche in your world, so it's awesome. um, I want to wrap this up and bring this home, and I guess I want to end it with your thoughts about the future of industrial real estate. And I'd like to frame it as, if you had money to place, if you were looking for value add deals and you were looking for opportunity, where would you place it? Either in terms of an asset class, a market, a certain tenant. What would you do moving forward?
That is a great question. I bet you I could actually give different answers on this depending on what time of the day it is. But as we are right now, I'm all in on industrial. My entire portfolio is industrial. Even in my stock account, I have real estate investment trusts that are focused on industrial. Not entirely, but I still have some there. So I've got a large proportion in industrial, and I'm bullish on industrial for the long term. Like you said earlier as well, the large distribution centers are out of reach. That's way out of my league. I'm not buying a $50 million distribution center, but I can go and buy a $3 million manufacturing property or a $3 million flex property. That is within my wheelhouse, and those are attractive properties where you amortize those over 20 years. That the outlook on that looks really good and really positive. So I'm long industrial. I have no idea what happens in the foreseeable future. There's just too much uncertainty and too many unknown risks. So there could be some aberrations. I would like to think that I've got enough equity in all these properties and enough of a balance sheet and reserves that I can weather a dip in the economy or anything that happens, provided it's not an outright recession, depression again. I should be able to weather downturns for the foreseeable future if there is any. And my horizon is infinite. I don't have a strategy on looking to sell. So with that in mind, that's why I'm bullish on industrial. I think there's other asset classes that would be very appealing though as well. I think if you can get a really good trophy asset in the office category right now and you're picking it up for 20 30 cents on the dollar, I don't know, that looks pretty attractive to me right now as well. I don't have the just the amount of money that I could float a building like that forever though. Like that, the burn on that could be devastating to a smaller investor like myself. But if you're a big institutional company right now and you can buy an office tower in New York or San Francisco, one of these world-class cities where they've just been beaten down, I think that there will be fortunes made in the office space, but it could be 20 years out. But that's one that's a bit interesting to me. And then also multifamily. I owned a small one when I was younger and sold it before I even got into real estate. So I don't have much experience in that one, but multifamily is still, I get why that's an appealing asset for a lot of people. Is you're always, if you buy in a good neighborhood in a good city, you're always going to have tenants, even if you have to lower the rent $200 a month. It is just in the temporary. I think you're always going to have cash flow. You're always going to have tenants in there. You'll probably always have some appreciation just from the fact that rents will eventually go up. So buying something in a world class city, Toronto in Canada would be one. Vancouver, San Francisco, I think is underpriced right now. Texas in general, for a whole bunch of reasons. I think Texas is continue to do well. Those ones would be interesting to me as well, but I just also don't have the bandwidth and mental energy to go and chase another market right now. But from the standpoint of just an investor looking for yield, I think that there are a lot of attractive options out there right now. But I'm all in on industrial.
Always bringing the value. Very well said. If you buy in the right location and you have a long-term outlook and can manage it halfway well, you're gonna do okay in real estate. Chad, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your generosity and sharing your wisdom and being with us today. If listeners want to connect with you, learn more about you, where would you like to send people?
YouTube is great. I usually put out a video or two a week, including the podcast, and then also active on LinkedIn and Twitter. So yeah, any one of those would be great.
Chad Griffiths, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Jonathan. Those great questions. Really enjoyed that conversation.
Listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, reach out to either one of us. We clearly love talking about commercial real estate, and we would love to connect with you. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you. Until next time, take care.